It's interesting to speak on a Monday night. It's unusual a little bit, but one of the nice things is that we're still feeling the shefa from the previous Shabbat as we begin to look forward to the next Shabbat, right? Because on Tuesday, we know Tuesday is the sort of the last day. You could still make Havdalah on Tuesday. If anybody hasn't heard Havdalah, you might be starving by now. But we're carrying the spirit of the previous Shabbat with us, and yet looking forward to the next. So we're going to speak about the coming parasha, which is Chayei Sarah, but carry with us something from the end of last week's parasha. There are many midrashim about the connection between the end of Parashat Vayera and the beginning of Chayei Sarah that concern the question of Sarah's death. And the parasha opens with the death of Sarah Imenu. There are many midrashim connecting her death to the Akedah, that she died when she received news of the Akedah one way or another. I will say, just because I have a strong feeling about this, that I don't love the interpretation that many people are familiar with, is that she died of shock when she heard what was happening at the Akedah. There is a beautiful alternate explanation that's taught by the Khatam Sofer, that when Sarah received news of the Akedah, she realized that her mission in life had been fulfilled. Because, as we'll talk about a little bit further, Yitzchak at the time of the Akedah was 37 years old. He was a grown man. He was fully able to resist. When Avraham Avinu said, "You are the lamb for the korban," he could have said, "Sorry, no, right? Not happening." But instead, he allowed himself, and not only allowed himself, the Midrash says he told his father, make sure not to make a mum, don't cause a blemish, because then I'll be unfit for the korban. Make sure I remain pure and whole, so that I will be a proper korban to Hashem. He offered himself willingly. And therefore, when Sarah heard this, says the Khatam Sofer, she understood that her mission in life was complete. She felt that she could then leave the world. And the language that's used in the Midrash is parcha nishmata. Her soul blossomed forth. Parcha nishmata. And says the Khatam Sofer, that's an expression of a peaceful death. That's not dying of shock or horror. That's an expression of, okay, good, I'm finished. That I can now die. And there are many sources that talk about the life of Sarah was so complete. And that's why the pasuk says, "Vayu shnei chayei Sarah sheva shanim," right? It's broken up, 7 years, 20 years, 100 years, because each is a complete set. The other midrash of Rabbi Akiva, that for every year of Sarah's life, Esther earned another medina, another province over which she would rule, because not a moment of Sarah's life was wasted. It was a life completely lived and fulfilled, and that's why she died. So that's the part I'm now talking about. Get me started. Okay, what I do want to focus on is a different explanation in the Midrash as to the relationship between the death of Sarah and the end of the previous parasha, because at the very end of the parasha, after the Akedah, when Avraham Avinu is on his way home, coming down from Har HaMoriah, a messenger arrives and tells him that a granddaughter has been born to his brother Nachor, and her name is Rivka. And says the Midrash, "V'zarach hashemesh uva hashemesh." The Midrash cites the pasuk in Kohelet. The sun rises and the sun sets. Says the Midrash, we don't need Shlomo HaMelech to tell us that the sun rises and the sun sets. We see that with our own eyes. Shlomo HaMelech is telling us something much deeper. What is he telling us? Ad shelo yashkia hakadosh baruch hu shimsho shel tzadik hu mazriach shimsho shel tzadik chaveiro. Before Hashem allows the sun to set on the life of a tzaddik, he brings the sun up on the life of the tzaddik who will be a peer, chaveiro, a peer to that tzaddik, who will, I don't want to use the word replacement, because nobody replaces somebody else, but who will carry forth the legacy, the teachings of that tzaddik. And one of the examples that's brought by the Midrash is this week's parasha. Ad shelo hishkia hakadosh baruch hu shimsha shel Sarah before Hashem could allow the sun to set on Sarah's life, his riach shimsha shel Rivka. He brought the sun to rise on the life of Rivka, who would be her successor. And that's the relationship between the two parshiot. Rivka is from the very first similar to Sarah, but different from her. And we're going to see how. We're told at the outset when she's named, Bituel Yalad et Rivka. The pasuk does not explain why he called her that. And there is one very slightly obscure midrash. Anybody named Rivka? Do we know the meaning of the name Rivka?
Ravka.
Okay. The midrash says Egla Marbek. He called her that because of an Egla Marbek. I don't know, maybe he was plowing in the fields when he got the news of her birth, but for whatever reason, Betuel called her a team of cattle bound together. Very strange. And it's, there's very little commentary on it. I searched and searched. And I found in the writings, in the teachings of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rav Shneir Zalman of Liadi, in TORAH, Inyan Rivka shehu b'chinat kesher v'chibur. The midah of Rivka, her character as expressed by her through her name, is the ability to bring about connection, to bring things together. And he goes on to explain that this is a b'china of what's called ahava rabba. It comes from a place of tremendous love. To bring about connection is it comes from a place of deep, deep love. The intellect makes distinctions, right? That's one of the hallmarks of the person is such an intellectual. They're able to analyze, to break things down, to make distinctions. This serves this function, that serves that function. It takes ahava rabba to bring things together. So, says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, this is a midah that is sort of lemala min hasechel. And he goes on to say that this is something that this is an ability that, thanks to Rivka Imenu, we all carry within us. We, as the descendants of Rivka Imenu, carry in our DNA this ability of b'chinat hamidot shelamala mehasechel, hanekudat ahava rabba sheyesh bechol nefesh, zenekudat b'chinat Rivka, shehu kesher v'chibur. It is bringing together kama behemot, whether it's cattle, but the cattle, he has already said, represent different midot. She's able to bring together different characteristics. This is going to become very, very important. Because what's the inherent midah of Rivka? When we first meet her, what's her outstanding quality? Chesed. Sorry. That's the midah that Eliezer was looking for. Eliezer was looking for a wife for Yitzchak. He's sent by Avraham Avinu, find an appropriate wife for Yitzchak. What kind of character would the wife of Yitzchak ben Avraham excel in? Chesed. So therefore he says, Hashem, grant me that the girl assigned, that the girl who comes out and offers water to my camels as well as to me, she's the one. And Chazal get into a whole discussion there. It's not such an appropriate thing to demand a sign from Hashem. But this one was okay. Hashem accepted it. Why? Number one, because he asked it in the merit of Abraham. But number two, because it was very rational. It was really to say, I'm looking for a girl who's going to demonstrate an outstanding midah of chesed, and that's how I'll know that she's the one. Makes a lot of sense. Because that was the hallmark of the family of Abraham himself. But Yitzchak's midah is different. Yitzchak's midah is the midah of gevura. Gevura is din. Gevura is seeing the world a little bit more black and white. It's that sense that I'm going to do whatever Hashem asks of me, which is why, to go back to the Akedah, the Al-Shich says, the Akedah was not a test for Yitzchak. The Pasuk says, V'ha'elokim nisa et Avraham. Why not Yitzchak? Why is it not a test for him? Because he sees things, that's how he sees the world. Hashem asked it of me, therefore I will do it. No questions asked. And it's amazing to me, and I spoke about this a little bit on the Parsha podcast, if you're following the Torah Imecha podcasts. It's amazing to me. I think about this so much these days that I look around me and I see that we are surrounded by Abraham and Sarahs who are sending off their children and willing to offer them up to the service of Hashem and to the service of OUisrael and Medina Israel. And we see so many Yitzchaks, so many young men who are going forward with such resolve. This is what's being asked of me. There's no question. Of course I'm going to do it. Of course I'm going to go. It's not even, they don't admit the question. I don't think I have to go. I mean, I'm sure everybody has a story they could tell at this point. But it is really inspiring, and that it definitely is a koach that comes to us from Yitzchak and Abraham and Sarah as well. So we have this midah of gevura, and he's now going to be matched with someone whose midah is chesed. So will she be able to relate to him, and will he be able to relate to her? That's the question. It becomes even more complicated after their first encounter. Where does their first encounter take place? Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnot arev. As Rivka and Eliezer are approaching on their camel from Haran, Yitzchak goes out into the field. Lasuach, Chazal say, is a lashon tefillah, and at this point he establishes the tefillah of mincha, the afternoon prayer, and that's how she first sees him. Lasuach, again, unusual term. Rav Hirsch says that lasuach is related to siach, to sichim, bushes, which push forth from the ground, right? They grow, and they're constantly striving to grow higher. And that's the midah of Yitzchak. Of Yitzchak in this tefillah is the coming forward, growing spiritually, trying to connect with Hashem. Rav Soloveitchik explains that he says this form of tefillah is a very introverted kind of tefillah. It's very different from the tefillah of Abraham. Every time we saw Abraham daven, when did we see Abraham daven, really? On behalf of the people of Sodom. And there he's like making demands of Hashem. He's very confrontational with Hashem. Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. Like, is it possible the judge of the entire world is not going to act justly? That's very harsh to say to Hashem. And says Rav Soloveitchik, for a tefillah like that, that requires a very erect posture, take a certain stance before Hashem. Yitzchak, on the other hand, embodies the pasuk in Tehillim, Tefillah la'ani ki ya'atof, lifnei Hashem yishpoch sicho. Right? When a person is involved in siach before Hashem, he's like la'ani, he's wrapped up in his tefillah. He's sort of disconnected from the world around him. He's bent over in humility before Hashem. The Netziv says that it's in that state that Hashem brought it about that Rivka would first see Yitzchak. But because she first saw him that way, when he was so wrapped in holiness and didn't even see what was going on around him, and there's a certain charada that enters her when she sees him. She starts trembling, and vatipol me'al hagamal, she falls from the camel, and Chazal says it's not that she fell, she propelled herself off the camel. Rav Soloveitchik says, to mimic his posture of humility. And she felt humbled before him. But the Netziv says, that's why, she was humbled and awed by him, and that's why the relationship of Rivka and Yitzchak is so different from that of the other imahot and avot. When Sarah Imenu had an issue in terms of raising children, she brought it to her husband, and she made demands of him, and she said straight out to him, Gareshet ben ha'ama et ha'ama hazot ve'et bena. Get rid of this child who is a threat to my child. Ki lo yirash ben ha'ama hazot im bini im Yitzchak. He is not going to inherit along with my son. She made demands. She said it straight out. When Rachel Imenu was distressed because she had no children of her own, she went to her husband and she said, Havali banim. You're clearly not davening hard enough for me to have children. Make it happen. Rivka never confronts Yitzchak. There's always a certain reserve between them. There's love. There's no question that there's love. When Yitzchak brings her into his mother's tent, ha'ohela Sarah imo, and he sees that the signs that indicated what Sarah stood for all returned upon the arrival of Rivka. The candles were relit. The anan descended once again. The cloud descended upon the tent, and the challah, the fresh challah, remained on the table from week to week. These are all signs of the three mitzvot that are special to women, right? Hadlakat nerot, challah, and nida. The anan kashur al ha'ohel represented taharat hamishpacha. So when these signs returned, by the way, I heard a beautiful word one time, many years ago, at Hashem Brachot, sheker hachein. If sheker hadlakat nerot, challah, nida, then hevel hayofi. But isha yirat Hashem, hitit halal. A woman who is a yirat Hashem, then she's going to be praised even for her beauty. It's not sheker. It's only if it's just skin deep, then sheker. But if it goes all the way through, if it's spiritual beauty, then hitit halal. Okay. Yitzchak Avinu sees these three simanim, and he realizes that she embodies these values, the same value system as his mother. Vaye'ehaveha. And he loved her. It's a straight out in the pasuk. Not very common to find that expression of love between avot and imahot, and in biblical character figures in general. There are a few, but it's rare. So vaye'ehaveha, he loved her. There was love. There was mutual respect. But on her part, there was also a certain awe, reverence that held her back from complete openness with her husband. So when the babies were causing her so much pain in her womb and she didn't know what was going on, she didn't ask him. Vatelech lidrosh et Hashem. She went elsewhere, whether to Shem Va'aver, whether to Abraham, different opinions. But she doesn't confront her husband and say, something odd is going on, because she feels like that's a chisaron in her, and he's so holy, maybe he'll think that she's unworthy of him. So she doesn't go to him. And when she receives the nivu'ah of Shnei Le'umim, Mimei Ayechi Paredu, you're going to have two children who are going to be diametrically opposed to one another, she doesn't share it with him. She never says anything to him. When Vayigdelu HaNe'arim, the children are raised and they grow up, and only after Vayigdelu HaNe'arim, they go their own separate ways. Yaakov becomes an Ish Tam Yoshev El Halim, a shepherd who sits in his tent and he studies Torah. And Esav goes out into the field, and Ish Yodei Atzayid, Ish Sadeh. She doesn't say anything. Rav Hirsch points out here, if you have time to take a look at Rav Hirsch on the Parsha, he says that these are bad chinuch decisions. Thank you so much. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyah b'dvaro. Amen. Let's make a mark on the piano. So these are bad chinuch decisions, and yet she remains quiet. She doesn't have that strength yet to confront him. But at the very end, when she overhears Yitzchak expressing his intention to Esav to give him a bracha before he dies, which according to Chazal, Rivka had tried several times to stall already, but now she sees she can't stop it. What does she do? She doesn't go into Yitzchak and say, wait, no, wrong son. She engineers this whole deception. And Rav Hirsch says it was a deception designed to undeceive. Yitzchak had been fooled by Esav all along. And Yitzchak, kitzayid b'fiv, Esav entrapped him verbally, making him think that he was so righteous when in fact he was just the opposite. And at this point, Rivka has to do something, so she disguises Yaakov, go in and get Esav's bracha, but she knows the bracha that Yitzchak intends to give to Esav. She knows, she has to know that the ruse is going to be uncovered. Esav is going to come back, and he's going to say, wait, you gave my bracha away, that wasn't me, it was my brother. So he says, Rav Hirsch, she did this intentionally. That's exactly what she wanted to happen. She wanted Yitzchak to come to the realization on his own how easily fooled he was. How easy it was. So it's a deception designed to undeceive. That he should say, oh my goodness, how could I have been fooled? How could I have thought that Yaakov was Esav? maybe all along I've been deceived by Esav. And in fact, that's what happens. And when Esav comes back and he wants his bracha, first Yitzchak says, well, I already gave him the bracha. And he's, okay, there's a bracha for, is there no bracha left for me? Well, okay, there is, but it's a very different bracha from the one that Yaakov received. Yaakov received a bracha, the beginning, Vayiten lecha ha'elokim mital hashamayim mishmanei haaretz. It's a material bracha, but where does it come from? All the material success that's promised in that bracha comes from Hashgachat Hashem. Where does Esav's bracha come from? Al charbecha tichyeh. It's all up to you. You're independent. And that's the way Esav preferred it. Yitzchak has realized that there's a very big difference in the worldview of the two brothers, and he speaks to each at the end in terms of what speaks to them. After the bracha, Esav is still not satisfied because he feels that he's been undermined, and what was, of course, not rightfully his because he had sold the birthright, but what he felt was rightfully his had been taken out from under him. So he resolves that when Yitzchak dies, he's going to kill Yaakov. And he's open about it. He says it to his chevra, and it gets repeated, and Rivka hears about it. And what does she do? Again, she doesn't go directly to Yitzchak yet. First she goes to Yaakov and she says to him, I can't become bereft of two of my children on the same day, because if of two people on the same day, if I lose Yitzchak and then I lose you as well, I can't handle it. So you have to run away from your brother until I stay there and go to my family in Haran. You'll find a wife there among my family and stay there until I tell you it's safe to come back. She goes to Yitzchak and she says to him, Oy vavoy, I can't stand it. I won't be able to stand it. It will cause me too much distress if Yaakov marries a Canaanite girl, right? Because now Yitzchak has taken wives from among the Benot Chet. She says, if Yaakov does the same thing, it'll kill me. And Yitzchak says, okay, no problem. And he calls Yaakov in and he tells him, go to Haran, to Rivka's family, and find a wife from there. Don't marry a Canaanite girl. Don't marry from among the Benot Chet. Only go back to Rivka's family, and there you'll find an appropriate wife. So what has she done? What has she done? She never comes forward and says, see, I told you so. Or I could have told you so. Or anything like that. She never makes Yitzchak feel anything less. But finally she is able to, she knows she can't confront him. She doesn't want to confront him in a way that is going to in any way belittle his integrity. She comes to him with a problem that she knows he can solve very easily in a way that will solve her problem as well. She doesn't have to say to him, Esav threatened. She's not tattletaling, Esav threatened to kill Yaakov. You have to save him. No, we have another problem. There's no girl here for Yaakov to marry. He has to go someplace where he's going to find a girl to marry. And Yitzchak says, you're right. I can make that happen. And he does on his own. And that's the tremendous koach of Rivka Imenu, lechaber, to bring things together, not by saying, I'm right, that one's wrong, you're wrong, you need to do this, but to allow the other person to come to the realization on their own and to bring together these midot of chesed and gvura. It took tremendous gvura for her to act in the way that she did. It wasn't natural to her to do what she did. But she was able to overcome, in a way, her own midah of chesed, or to pair it really with the midah of gvura, to bring those midot together in order to serve Hashem. And this is the strength of the Jewish woman, and that's the strength that we're told we today carry within us as well. We are able to bring about connections when we discover the strengths that lie within us, when we uncover our own strengths, to the point that we don't have to advertise them, but we use them in our own service of Hashem and to help others draw closer to Hashem. That's our Yerusha from Rivka Imenu. And that's the tremendous strength with which she has endowed us, that we continue to be able to tap into today. This is learning to serve Hashem, each with our own strengths, is also reflected, not in this week's parasha, but in the coming week, even after that, we'll go a little bit ahead in Parashat Toldot, when Yitzchak digs wells, and he redigs the wells that Avraham Avinu had dug in the land of the Plishtim. The Plishtim had meanwhile stopped them up to their own detriment. So why did they stop up their own wells? A beautiful explanation in the Ketava HaKabbalah. He explains that Avraham had given the wells names related to Hashem. So he would name a well, for example, Hashem Kel Olam. What then happened? A person had to say, oh, I'm just running down to the well. I'm going down to get water from Hashem Kel Olam. So that was to sort of make people, to concretize the idea in people's minds that where does the water come from? Hashem. It was to bring them closer to Hashem. Yitzchak redug the wells, and he renamed them with the names given to them by Avraham because he wanted to carry on his father's work. He's carrying on his father's legacy. That's the Ketava HaKabbalah. Rav Soloveitchik comes and he says, that wasn't enough. That was not enough in terms of what Hashem wanted of him. So when Hashem appeared to Yitzchak after he dug the wells and he promised him the land, he came in the name of, I'm doing this ba'avur avdi Avraham, for the sake of Avraham. And Yitzchak understands, wait, well, what's my role here? I haven't yet fulfilled it. He has not, says the Rabbi, he has not yet dug his own spiritual wells. He needs to find his own derech, his own manner of serving Hashem, his own unique contribution to the service of Hashem. And I think that process applies to Sarah and Rivka as well. Each of them served Hashem in their own way. And says the Rav, that's why when we daven, in Shemona Esrei, we say Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov. We don't just say Elokei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, because each one had a different approach to the service of Hashem. This is a gift to us. Each one of us has to find our way in keeping with the teachings of our forefathers, in keeping with the structure that's afforded to us by Chazal, by the Rabbanim, yet finding our own path within that structure and sharing that and using that to help bring others into the picture as well. And again, this is the koach of Rivka Imenu, and it's a koach that we carry forward, and I bless each and every one of you that we should all be able to put this koach to use to bring about chibur, connection is something we need so very much these days. Bring about connection, see the good in others, and see how we can all work together to serve Hashem.